back, police watchdog IPID has urged police officers to use force that fits the threat when effecting arrests. This follows the killing of 18 cash-in-transit heist suspects in Makhado in Limpopo in September and 19 in KwaZulu-Natal just last month. IPID spokesperson Robbie Raburabu tells us more.
I believe when the police are trying to defend themselves, or they are defending themselves when they are trying to arrest someone and that someone actually shoots back at the police, would we then say the police were wrong? Because the law would have allowed them to actually do that. The law says if you are being attacked or the life of the next person is being threatened and you are there and that attack is imminent, then you need to act. Then as long as the force that you use is proportionate to what of the attack, then you acting within the law.
Now, Police and Prisons Civil Rights Union, that's Pop Crew's spokesperson Richard Mamabolo, has slammed IPID's remarks over the number of suspects that have been killed by police in KZN.
I don't think we can sit back and say that because there have been certain incidents which would have taken place, which of course we think we would like to see more taking place to discourage the criminality that is happening in our country, then police must be condemned. We definitely do agree with what the Minister of Police and the National Police Commissioner are saying, that police should fight fire with fire. Police officers have been killed and nobody is saying anything about it. Nothing is being happening about it. So there definitely needs to be sufficient action in retaliating to all these attacks.
All right, we've gotten you both sides of that argument, so to speak. Let's continue to discuss this issue of rampant crime in the country with a focus on KZN. We're joined this morning by Dr. Jean Redpath, Dr. Jean Redpath, who is a senior researcher with the Africa Criminal Justice Reform at the Dullah Omar Institute. And joining us on the line this morning is Khalipa Hlatshwayo, who is a KZN CPF board member. To both of our guests, thanks very much indeed for joining us. Dr. Redpath, I want to kick off the discussion with you this morning because this issue is not new. This issue of the use of force in response to crime in our country. Police Minister Behicele has on many occasions over the years, even during his time as police commissioner many years ago, encouraged this directive of shoot to kill when addressing officers and telling them how to deal with crime. What is your response, broadly speaking, to that kind of motto when it comes to police?
Well, the number one response is that it doesn't help to escalate violence. And we see, just as you said, this problem of crime and criminality and has been around for a long time. And it has also been the case for a long time that KwaZulu-Natal has been an outlier in terms of police killings. And that doesn't mean that its crime is an outlier. So it's the response of the police that has been disproportionate. When you crunch the data, you see there's a clear relationship that when police are under-resourced, they tend to resort to more violence, which makes some sort of sense. But when you plot KwaZulu-Natal onto that relationship, you see it is an extreme outlier in terms of police violence. And ultimately, it doesn't help the situation. It escalates violence. It makes things worse. And that we should be very careful of advocating for violence of any kind. And in fact, we should be very careful of defining clearly what proportionate violence is in these contexts.
And do we have those parameters? What does proportionate violence mean? Is that clear to officers?
So ultimately, one is allowed to use force, rather use the word force rather than violence. One is allowed to use force whenever it is in protection of yourself or another person. As soon as you are then stepping into the realm of perhaps revenge, perhaps torture, perhaps anger, perhaps sort of finishing the last few people off who perhaps are already injured, then that is no longer an action which is protected by the law.
Right. Let's bring in the KZN CPF board this morning. Khalipa, it's an important discussion for communities to have, right? It's that time of year where communities are more under siege perhaps than throughout the rest of the year. But in KZN, it is a particular province insofar as the various issues facing it. And when residents feel so under siege, I imagine that they would be in support of this kind of excessive force by police. But what's your take?
Okay, good morning, ma'am. As a CPF KZN, we already started far. We not just started now because it's this time of the year, but we started when the Minister of National Minister of when we started Operation Chanel, it's when we're starting the strategy of fighting with crime in KZN, so that when we meet this time of the year, we already have everything in order. As we even launched in KZN Police Indaba, that's where we were using all the strategies how to fight crime in KZN. And since we are here, we have a lot of strategies to fight crime as we start early this year, so that when we are here at the end of the year, we have already minimized the problem. So enye into ekhona kakhulu sisebenza kakhulu namaphoyisa and nomnyango yonke KwaZulu-Natal ibonakale isondela kakhulu entweni kade ziyi-challenge ukuthi sikwazi ukulwa nobugebengu. Siyabona lapha ubaba uHlomuka nomnyango wa-Premier umam nomusa siyile kubona sakhala ukuthi asikwazi ukusebenza kahle sithi sinama-patrollers nathi siwu-CPF sisebenza akukho lula ukufinyelela sithi namaphoyisa iy'moto zingekho enough ukufinyelela ey'ndaweni zeyigameko zeyigebengu. So base nabo basilekelela kakhulu. Ngiyacabanga ukuthi mhlawumbe nibonile nje endabeni kuthanga ukuthi kade bezosinikezela zona lezo imoto lezo ukuthi sikwazi ukusebenza. So nje kulokhu ngempela igebengu siyayivimbezela kuzoncipha ngempela ubugebengu ngoba izinsiza kusekela sinazo and ama-department amaningi ayasondela sizokwazi ukuthi sibambisane kakhulu uma sibambisene nawo wonke ama-department njengoba ubona nje futhi ukuthi kuzoba nenye futhi ilonje ezoba khona eFriday lapho uPC ubaba umkhwanazi ezohlanganyela nawo futhi amaphoyisa ezohlanganyela futhi nathi ukuthi siphinde futhi sicijwe ukuthi silwa kanjani sivimba kuphi ubugebengu kulezi ndawo lezi ezinobugebengu okutholakala usekudlulele kakhulu kulezo indawo. So nje kukhulu silwa nako kanti futhi sinama-program akhona kuwo wonke ama-district njengoba nje kuDisemba to January lapho kuzoba namakhampeni amabili district ne-district la KwaZulu-Natal lapho sizobe sivimba khona ubugebengu. So nje kukhulu esinakho sizovimba ngempela futhi ubugebengu akukho ukuzosivimba ngoba izinto zethu siziqale way before siplanile kulokhu. Ngiyathembisa kakhulu ukuthi nje kulo December ubugebengu buzoncipha ngendlela esimangaliso ngoba sibambisene kakhulu namaphoyisa nana yonke iminyango ekhona eKZN.
Khalipa, you'll forgive me for asking my next question in English, but please feel free to speak in your home language. You talk about, the fact that there's not enough cars with police. There's an issue of being under-resourced. These two campaigns that are being launched in December and in January ahead of and during the festive season. But when you look at from one year to the other, because obviously these are annual campaigns, right? Are you seeing a marked improvement with these campaigns and with the response of police?
Yes, there will be a much improvement because it never happened before. And we started before. We planned before so that everything, when it's come to this season, we'll already have planned for a situation like this one.
Dr. Redpath, are you able to come in and just talk about the year-on-year situation in KZN? These campaigns by police, as we know, they happen every single year. It's supposed to be in preparation for the festive season. They run throughout sort of late November through to early and mid-January. We've been talking about KZN as a particular case study insofar as violence is concerned, right? Do these campaigns, in your experience, make a difference?
So my response would be is a campaign suggests that your policing in the ordinary course is not working. And what we see in KwaZulu-Natal in particular is the legacy of the amalgamation of the KwaZulu police with the South African police way back in 1994. If you go and look at the distribution of resources, and the previous speaker spoke about the lack of resources, when you go and look to where police officers are allocated, you find that areas in the former KwaZulu are significantly less resourced than areas of the former Natal. And that's a historical artifact that has not been corrected over time. And this disparity in resourcing continues to cause significant problems because it allows criminality to grow in those significantly under-resourced areas. It is correct that if one looks at the data over time, that October to December in every province, including KwaZulu-Natal, is the most concerning, particularly in terms of violent crime. It's partly an artifact of the weather. It's partly an artifact of increased economic activity. So in that sense, a particular concentration of policing activity over that time is rational. However, what we need is a situation where the policing is sufficiently good and sufficiently rationally distributed around the province so that we don't have this need for this situation or police to resort to particular kinds of violence, because we've already addressed the crime syndicate that is carrying out these crime activities. We've already prevented and we've already made people feel safe. So good policing actually prevents the need for police to have to work in situations where they're putting themselves at risk.
Yeah, campaigns, because day-to-day policing just isn't enough, and how the issue of being under-resourced impacts how police officers respond. Let me thank both of our guests this morning. Dr. Jean Redpath is a senior researcher at the Africa Criminal Justice Reform Institute, at the Dullah Omar Africa Institute, and Khalipa Hlatshwayo is with the KZN CPF board.